I once spoke with an old emergency dispatcher in Phoenix, Arizona. She told me about a night she could never forget, when a desperate call shattered the silence. Since hearing it, I've never looked at emergency calls the same way again. Some cries for help come too late. June 3rd, 2013, Phoenix, Arizona. The phone in the 911 dispatch center rang loudly and urgently. A high-pitched, panicked female voice screamed,
"My husband! My husband is about to die! Help! Help, please!"
The dispatcher quickly rerouted the call to the nearest hospital. Just a few minutes later, an ambulance tore through the quiet of the impoverished neighborhood. The address provided by the woman was only about 2 kilometers from the hospital. But when the medical team, led by Dr. Amanda Lee, rushed into the shabby rental home, they found a man lying motionless on the floor. All resuscitation efforts were in vain. The patient had already passed away.
We very sorry.
Dr. Amanda Lee said softly, her voice heavy with sorrow. A heart-wrenching cry erupted. The woman collapsed beside the body, screaming her husband's name, Richard Moore. The paramedics could do nothing more than sadly return to the hospital. But on the way back, Dr. Amanda Lee couldn't shake the nagging feeling. During the initial examination, she had noticed strange bruises on the victim's shoulders and neck. Fresh bruises.
Ma'am? Well, what happened to your husband?
Dr. Amanda Lee had asked Emily Carter at the scene. The woman could only sob helplessly. Amidst her desperate cries, she choked out,
He fell down the stairs. I didn't think it would be this serious.
But with her years of experience, Dr. Amanda Lee sensed something was wrong. The color of those bruises, though recent, seemed to have formed about a day or two earlier. A dark intuition flashed through her mind. As soon as she returned to the hospital, Dr. Amanda Lee immediately reported the case to her superiors. Not long after, the phone at the Phoenix Police Department rang. Upon receiving the report, we rushed out. The scene was an old, run-down rental home tucked deep into a small alleyway. When we arrived, just about an hour after the ambulance had left, an unbelievable sight awaited us. The victim's family had already completed preparations for the funeral. The funeral home staff was ready to transport the body for cremation.
"Hold it. Stop!"
I shouted, halting everyone in the house, including the funeral home workers. The urgency felt suspicious. Even with different customs around mourning, no one rushed to cremate a loved one that quickly. The behavior of those present didn't resemble ordinary grief. It looked more like they were trying to cover something up. I ordered them to lift the victim's shirt. A horrifying sight unfolded before us. The man's back was covered in dark purple bruises.
"What's going on here?"
I growled at Emily Carter. She kept sobbing and repeated what she had told the paramedics.
He fell down the stairs. His nose and mouth were bleeding. I just ran to get a towel, and when I came back, he was unconscious.
We inspected the scene thoroughly, especially the staircase. The staircase was old, yes, but the incline wasn't steep and there was a sturdy handrail. The victim, Richard Moore, 53 years old, not young, but not old either, unless a sudden medical event had struck. Him, a fall like that leading to death seemed highly unlikely. Besides Emily Carter, there was a young couple at the house, a man and a woman. At first, we thought they were family members, but after verifying, we found out their names were Kevin Adams, 23, and Samantha Reed, also 23. What stood out was that Samantha Reed cried even harder than Emily Carter, as if she had lost someone closer to her than Emily had. After a quick conference, we decided to immediately halt the funeral and transport Richard Moore's body to the medical examiner for a full investigation. Something about this case was very, very wrong. The victim, Richard Moore, was a well-known figure in the mining industry in Phoenix. He was wealthy and had been married twice. Emily Carter was his second wife. So why would a wealthy man like him die in such a shabby rental house? The results of the autopsy left us stunned. There were numerous injuries on the victim's body, similar in shape and caused by the same blunt object. Most importantly, the head injuries had led to a brain hemorrhage, causing coma and death. The evidence clearly showed These injuries were not consistent with a fall or accidental bumping into stairs. They'd been inflicted by a cylindrical object, possibly a bat or something similar. This was certainly not an accident. So, Richard Moore had been murdered? But who was the killer? Why had Emily Carter lied? And what role did the young couple play in this? When we announced the autopsy results, the faces of all three, Emily Carter, Kevin Adams, and Samantha Reed, changed dramatically. Right then, Kevin Adams suddenly confessed.
No need to look further. I'm the one who beat him. He deserved to die.
Kevin Adams claimed that he had not known Richard Moore beforehand. The reason he attacked Richard with a rubber baton was that he had caught Richard assaulting Samantha Reed. Hearing this, Samantha Reed burst into sobs again. She testified that she was an insurance sales agent. Richard Moore was a major client she had met 2 months earlier. However, during their meetings, Richard had frequently made inappropriate advances. Samantha tried to endure it, thinking about her job and the large commission if she could close a deal with him and his mining workers. At first, Richard's actions were limited to minor touches and suggestive comments. But on June 1st, Richard Moore came to Samantha Reed's rental home under the pretense of discussing an insurance contract. He brought wine and snacks. During the meeting, Richard kept pushing drinks on Samantha. Unable to refuse, she drank heavily and became completely intoxicated. When Samantha lost all consciousness, Richard raped her. At that very moment, Kevin Adams returned unexpectedly and witnessed the horrifying scene. Outraged, he grabbed a rubber baton from the house and beat Richard Moore furiously. He said he only intended to vent his anger, to teach Richard a lesson, not to kill him. After the beating, Richard Moore begged for forgiveness. He promised to pay them a large sum of money and wrote a confession, also recording an audio admission of his crime against Samantha Reed. We examined the confession note and the recording. Both the handwriting and voice were confirmed to be Richard Moore's. However, doubts lingered. Had the confession and recording been coerced? And why was Emily Carter at the scene, and even lying to protect the young couple? When interrogated, Emily Carter remained emotionally unstable, sobbing and barely able to speak clearly. After calming down, she finally began to confess. Emily and Richard Moore had married in 2011. At the time, she was 26 years old, and Richard was already 51. Despite strong objections from her family due to the age gap and Richard's previous marriage, Emily insisted on marrying him. After the wedding, she often called her parents, saying she was very happy, living a life of luxury. But that happiness didn't last long. Richard Moore gradually changed, frequenting prostitutes. Emily tried to endure, thinking he was under work stress. But the situation worsened. Richard started beating her without reason. Emily Carter had even taken photos of her injuries, intending to report to the police, but ultimately chose to hold back, planning instead to quietly file for divorce. By June, Emily received a phone call from Richard's number, but on the other end was a young man's voice, saying her husband had raped his girlfriend and demanding that she come immediately to resolve it. The address given was the shabby rental home. When Emily arrived, she saw her husband tied to a chair, with the furious Kevin Adams standing nearby. Richard Moore admitted he had raped Samantha Reed. He said he had promised them a large sum of hush money, but all his assets had already been transferred to his ex-wife. Thus, he begged Emily to find money for him. Hearing this, Emily Carter exploded in rage. Her husband, who had abused her, now committed this disgrace, gave all the money to his ex, and still dared to demand her help. In a fit of fury, Emily grabbed a nearby baton and hit her husband several times before storming out, saying she would come back the next day. She had no idea it would end like this. Emily Carter admitted hitting her husband, but didn't know if her blows had contributed to his death. She confessed she lied about the stair fall to protect Kevin Adams and Samantha Reed. The testimonies of all three seemed to align, sketching a portrait of a case that appeared close to resolution. But were there still hidden truths behind these lies? People can lie, but evidence does not. At the scene, we found a laundry bag out on the balcony. Inside were a length of rope and a rubber baton. In addition, there was a black wall clock. The rope had been used for tying, the baton for beating. But why was there a wall clock here? Marks on the wall indicated that this clock had been taken down from Samantha Reed's apartment. Why would someone remove it and bring it here? We disassembled the clock for inspection. A horrifying truth was uncovered. At the 6 o'clock mark, right inside the number, there was a tiny hole, and hidden inside, a miniature surveillance camera. However, there was no memory card or storage device in the clock. So where was the signal being transmitted? A thorough search was carried out. We found a laptop hidden under Samantha Reed's bed. Inside, folders contained footage recorded by the clock camera, filled with explicit videos. They captured the scene where Richard Moore raped Samantha Reed.
Who? Who installed this camera?
I asked Kevin Adams and Samantha Reed. They claimed Richard Moore had brought it. After discovering it, they said they feared the footage would be leaked and disgrace Samantha, so they had hidden it. The story sounded plausible, but there were glaring flaws. If Richard Moore's goal was to get Samantha drunk and assault her, if he had a fetish for recording, he could have simply used his phone or any handheld camera. Why complicate things by embedding a spy camera inside a wall clock? Moreover, according to their statements, this was Richard Moore's first time at the apartment. So how could there be a clean circle on the wall? The kind that only forms after a clock hangs there for a long time? The stain pattern clearly indicated the clock had been hung there for an extended period. Probably someone had taken it down, modified it, then reinstalled it. Such a process would require time, certainly not something spontaneous. Coincidentally, Samantha Reed had rented this apartment about a month earlier. She met Richard Moore about 2 months ago. Was this a coincidence? Or was it a trap laid in advance? We continued interrogating Kevin Adams. Under undeniable evidence and intense pressure, the young couple finally confessed the truth. This was all a carefully orchestrated setup. They knew Richard Moore was a wealthy tycoon, so they had Samantha Reed pose as a naive insurance agent to lure him in, capture compromising footage, and extort him. But unexpectedly, during the process, a death occurred. From being potential blackmail victims, they had now become conspirators in extortion, leading to homicide. Perhaps, at this point, the most pitiful figure was Emily Carter, a wife who had already endured domestic abuse, only to unwittingly fall into the young lover's blackmail scheme. Everything spiraled beyond her control, but the story wasn't over yet. Richard Moore's death was clear, but the true character of Emily Carter remained shrouded in mystery. We couldn't overlook even the smallest details. To fully understand this woman, we began digging into every relationship surrounding the couple, searching for fragments that might reveal her true nature. And what we uncovered, I must admit, stunned all of us. Those who knew Richard Moore, from close friends to family members, even his ex-wife, all shared the same assessment. Richard Moore was not a womanizer. They described him as a mature, self-disciplined man, someone who, despite his wealth, had never been promiscuous. This testimony completely contradicted the narrative that Emily Carter and the young lovers had been trying to construct. In contrast, when we investigated Emily Carter, a completely different portrait emerged. Everyone who had ever interacted with her spoke of a woman who spent extravagantly and showed no concern for family. Yet, in front of outsiders, she always portrayed herself as a pitiable wife, an unfortunate victim. We even gathered stories dating back to her college years. Former classmates said they distanced themselves from Emily Carter due to her cold, materialistic nature and her habit of lying shamelessly to achieve personal goals. They recalled how, for her own benefit, she would fabricate stories, drive wedges between friends. Gradually, no one wanted to associate with someone so calculating. These pieces of information, like sharp knives, systematically dismantled the sympathetic image Emily Carter had worked so hard to build. But the real twist, the part that still sends chills down my spine even now, lay buried deep in the deleted messages. Using various investigative techniques, we recovered data from Emily Carter's computer and phone. One message made everything clear. On June 1st, the day Richard Moore went to Samantha Reed's house, Emily Carter had texted Kevin Adams.
Stick to the original plan. Make sure you save the video.
It turned out Emily Carter herself was the mastermind behind everything. She had orchestrated the perfect play, starring herself as a helpless, wronged woman. Faced with irrefutable evidence, Emily Carter was forced to confess the entire truth. Before the marriage, Richard Moore had spoiled Emily Carter, giving her everything she wanted. But after they married, he gradually tightened the finances when he realized she only knew how to spend lavishly. Emily Carter became dissatisfied and started thinking about divorce to claim his assets. However, the lawyer told her it wouldn't be easy unless she had evidence of abuse or infidelity. Thus, Emily Carter hired a private investigator to follow her husband, and that person was none other than Kevin Adams. Kevin Adams, young and tech-savvy, secretly installed a tracking device on Richard Moore's car. But after a period of time, no evidence of infidelity was gathered. Instead, Kevin Adams developed feelings for Emily Carter. It's unclear whether Emily truly loved Kevin, or if she simply manipulated him because of his youth and obedience. Their relationship evolved from employer-employee to lovers. Emily's craving for divorce and a new life only grew stronger. She devised a plan to hire someone to stage an affair to obtain the necessary evidence. And Samantha Reed, a poor nail technician, was hired to carry out the plan. Samantha Reed was not Kevin Adams' girlfriend, as initially claimed. After agreeing on a payment, the three of them began executing the scheme. Samantha Reed enrolled in a crash course in insurance sales to approach Richard Moore. However, even after a while, Richard Moore still didn't fall for the setup. Finally, Emily Carter decided to rent a house in the suburbs of El Paso, install surveillance cameras, and stage a rape scene. On June 1, 2013, Samantha Reed lied to Richard Moore, telling him it was her birthday and inviting him over. She had prepared wine and snacks, carefully crafting a romantic setting. It's hard for a 53-year-old man to resist the charm of a young, admiring 23-year-old woman. Richard Moore fell into the trap. Everything unfolded exactly as the trio had planned. Their goal wasn't just evidence of infidelity, but also to gather proof of sexual assault to blackmail Richard Moore, forcing him to divorce and split his assets. If that failed, they would send him to jail. In either case, even without a formal divorce, Richard Moore's assets would fall under Emily Carter's control. After tying up Richard Moore, Kevin Adams called Emily Carter to come over and forced Moore to write a confession and record an audio admission. It seemed Richard Moore deliberately dragged out the process, making mistakes repeatedly, each mistake earning another beating from Kevin Adams. Richard even mentioned that he had transferred all his assets to his ex-wife, possibly a ploy to buy time for Emily to go outside, maybe to call the police. But Richard didn't realize that the person he thought was his ally was actually the director of this entire setup. During the captivity, Kevin Adams severely beat Richard Moore, partly to instill fear and force compliance, and partly to vent his own rage. According to Emily Carter's confession, Kevin Adams, as her lover, had witnessed the abuse she suffered from Richard Moore. Thus, beating Richard Moore felt like an act of revenge. As for whether Richard Moore had actually abused Emily Carter, the photos of injuries she provided could not be verified as authentic or fabricated, because now Richard Moore was dead and could no longer speak. Finally, the truth was exposed. A murder case concealed by sophisticated lies and a vicious blackmail scheme. Emily Carter, who appeared to be a pitiful wife, turned out to be the mastermind behind it all. Kevin Adams and Samantha Reed, initially portrayed as accomplices, also had to bear responsibility for their actions. The price of greed and deceit was too high. A life was lost, and 3 other lives were swallowed by the darkness of crime. The case was closed, but its echoes continued to haunt us, the investigators. It made us realize just how ruthless and terrifying human beings can become when driven by money and desire.